In this video you will learn the best defense for black, the king's Indian defense, against one of the best plans for white. After the move d4. Black responds with knight f6, a very flexible move. Black develops his king's knight on its natural square and takes control of the e4 square. White plays c4, placing his side pawn next to the central pawn to increase control over the central squares. Black plays g6, with the idea of developing the king's bishop by fianchetto. White plays knight c3, developing his queen's knight and taking control of the e4 square, with the idea of playing e4 to form a powerful pawn center. Black responds with bishop g7, developing his king's bishop and preparing to castle. Now, white can play e4, occupying the center with his pawns. White has already formed a powerful pawn center and is threatening to advance with e5, which would give him an advantage. So, black responds with d6, taking control of the e5 square, to prevent the white pawn from advancing. Now, one of the best variations for white is f3, the Saemisch variation. White's plan is to develop his pieces with bishop e3, queen d2, long castling, knight g to e2 and prepare an attack on the king side. Now black can castle. If white now makes the move bishop g5, black can play c5, attacking the opponent's pawn center. If white now captures the pawn on c5, black can capture pawns, or he can also play queen a5, moving the queen to a very active square, pinning the knight on c3 and the pawn on c5. Black can capture the pawn on c5 without allowing the exchange of queens. White can play bishop takes f6. After bishop takes f6. White can play c takes d6, with the idea of keeping the extra pawn. Black can play bishop takes c3 check. After b takes c3. Queen takes c3 check. The white king is forced to lose the right to castle. After king f2. Black can play queen e5. After d takes e7. Queen takes e7. White is an extra pawn, but his king is very exposed, and the white pawns on the queen side are very weak. Black has very good attacking chances and has the advantage. After the move c5, white can advance his pawn to d5. Black can play e6, attacking the opponent's pawn center. If white captures on e6, black can recapture with the bishop and then can develop his knight to the c6 square. He can make use of the d4 square and black has very good play. After the move e6, white can move his queen to d2, continuing with his plans and preparing to castle on the queen side. Black can play e takes d5, eliminating the opponent's central pawn. If white now captures on d5 with the knight, black can play bishop e6, and then can develop his knight to the c6 square. He can make use of the d4 square and black has very good play. If white captures on d5 with c takes d5, we get to Benoni type positions, which we will study in other videos. Another option for white is to capture with the central pawn. After e takes d5. Black can play knight b to d7. Black can occupy the e-file with his rook, which has been left open and has very good play. After black castling, white can develop his queen bishop to the e3 square. Black can play c5, attacking the opponent's pawn center. Black's correct plan is to attack the opponent's pawn center, with the idea of eliminating it as soon as possible, even if it means sacrificing a pawn. If white now advances with d5, black plays e6, attacking the opponent's pawn center and a Benoni position will surely follow. After the move c5, white can capture the c5 pawn. After d takes c5. White can play queen takes d8, exchanging queens. After rook takes d8. White can play bishop takes c5, capturing a pawn and threatening to capture the e7 pawn. Black can play knight c6, developing his queen knight to its natural square and defending the e7 pawn. White can play knight d5, centralizing the knight and increasing the pressure against the e7 pawn. It seems that white is putting a lot of pressure on it, but black can play knight d7, threatening to capture the enemy bishop and at the same time freeing up the g7 bishop. If white now captures on e7 with the knight, black can play knight takes e7. After bishop takes e7, black can play bishop takes b2. White can capture the d8 rook. Black can capture the a1 rook. The position has been simplified. White's pawns are very weak on the queen side. Black can continue with moves like b6, bishop a6, rook c8, knight e5. Finally, he will probably manage to win back the pawn and has very good play. After the move knight d7. White can capture the e7 pawn with the bishop. After knight takes e7. Knight takes e7 check. Black plays king f8. After knight d5. Black can play bishop takes b2. White can play rook b1, defending his rook and attacking the enemy bishop. Black can play bishop g7, retreating his bishop to a safer square. The position has been simplified. White has an extra pawn but his pawns are very weak on the queen side. Black will be able to quickly activate his pieces and has very good play. From here we will follow a masterful game in which we will be able to see how the game can continue. Now, white played knight h3, developing his knight on this square to avoid blocking the passage of his bishop. Black played b6, blocking the b-file, increasing control over the c5 square and allowing the development of the bishop on c8. White played bishop e2, completing the development of his minor pieces and preparing to castle. Black played bishop b7, completing the development of his minor pieces. White played king f2, connecting the rooks. Black played rook to c8, activating his queen rook and beginning to put pressure on the c4 pawn, which is a weak point in the opponent's camp. White played rook h to c1, bringing his king rook into play and reinforcing the defense of the c4 pawn. Black played bishop h6, activating the bishop and attacking the opponent's rook, with the idea of driving it out of its position. White played f4, blocking the action of the opponent's bishop. The problem with this move is that now the e4 pawn has lost its support. Black played knight c5, activating the bishop and threatening to capture the e4 pawn. White played king f3, defending the e4 pawn, to prevent the knight from being able to capture it. Black played f5, bringing the pawn into the attack and threatening to capture the opponent's central pawn. Black has the initiative and is increasing the pressure with each move. By attacking the e4 pawn, the white knight on d5 is going to lose its support and eventually be able to be captured. White captured the f5 pawn. The game continued. G takes f5. White played knight f2, with the idea of bringing the knight closer to the center so that it can be activated. Black played knight e6, increasing the pressure against the f4 pawn and freeing up the action for the rook along the c-file. The knight can also jump to the d4 square, creating serious threats. For example, if white now plays g3, to reinforce the defense of the f4 pawn. Black can play knight d4 check. After king e3, to keep the bishop defended. Black can play rook e8 check. After king takes d4. Black plays rook takes e2. Black has invaded with his rook on the second rank, threatens to capture the enemy knight and has a clear advantage. For example, in case of knight d3. Black plays rook e5 check. After king c3. Black can play bishop takes d5, taking advantage of the pin, and is winning. After the move knight e6, white played knight d3, reinforcing the defense of the f4 pawn and bringing his knight closer to the center with the idea of activating it. What would you play in this position? Boom! Now, black played rook takes c4, completely destroying the support of the opponent's knight. Black is winning. If now white plays rook takes c4. Black responds bishop takes d5 check, then he will capture the rook on c4 and win. In the game, white played knight b4, reinforcing the defense of the knight on d5. Black played rook takes c1. After rook takes c1. Black played bishop takes d5 check. After knight takes d5. Rook takes d5. The position has been simplified, black has an extra piece and his advantage is decisive. White played rook c8 check. Black responded with the d8 rook and white finally resigned. A very instructive game in which we saw how to use the king's Indian defense to fight against the Saemisch variation.